and I'm the Chief Executive of Manawatu District Council, and it's my pleasure to be hosting this session tonight. And with me is...
Kia ora. Hello, my name is Alison Short and I'm one of the councillors here at Manawatu District Council. And welcome to the second of our 5 discussions on the big issues facing the Manawatu District in coming years. Tonight's session is one of 5 topics we discuss, the challenges each topic presents and how one relates to Council's long-term planning process. Tonight we will be discussing climate change adaptation within the Manawatu District. Let us know where you are listening from by typing in the comments box and post on your Facebook page to invite other people to join the conversation. 2 weeks ago we discussed earthquake-prone buildings. You can view the recorded discussion on our Facebook page or website. Last Monday we were supposed to have a session about housing in the Manawatu, but unfortunately we had some technical difficulties and were unable to go live, but we have rescheduled this one for the 15th of June. Over the next few Monday nights we will be covering sealing of our gravel roads, housing availability in the Manawatu District, the future of our community facilities. We are hoping to encourage a conversation about each of these topics to help us at Council understand how our communities feel about them and how you think Council should address the challenges that each one brings. So click the like button so that you can hear us loud and clear. Tonight we are going to set the context for today's topic, then we plan to answer your questions as best we are able. Type your question in the feed below this video and we will do our best to answer them by the end of the session. If there are questions that we can't answer, we will find the answer and reply to the comments over the next couple of days. We expect this session to last for about half an hour.
Now, we know there are a wide range of opinions about climate change, and we know this topic can get a bit heated, a bit excited, and we don't want that to happen tonight. So we are setting some clear boundaries on our discussion. Tonight is not about whether climate change is real, arguing the causes of climate change. It's not about whether Council should be having this discussion or not. We're placing these boundaries so we can have a reasonable discussion about climate change, both adaptation and mitigation. And we're obliged to have this conversation with our communities because of the importance of this topic. Now, there's lots of reasons for this topic to be very important and why we need to have a conversation about it. Firstly, the conversation and planning is happening at a global and national level, and we need to have a local level discussion. Secondly, because all councils under the Zero Carbon Act are described as reporting organisations and will need to provide information to the government or the Climate Change Commission to provide information on our risks and our adaptation planning. Thirdly, because financial institutions like insurance companies and banks are making decisions based on climate change science and the effect it has on everyone, including Council. 4, because the majority of Council's investment goes on infrastructure, roading, water, waste, parks, reserves, treatment plants, stormwater systems, water systems, and climate change modelling tells us that in some of these cases, infrastructure may be at risk if there is a significant change in climate or a significant change in our environment. So we need to ensure that our asset planning, which we need to do for the long term, takes any changes into account. And finally, because many people in our community are concerned about climate change, and the Council represents the community. Ultimately, what is of concern to the community is of concern to the Council. For these reasons, we have a practical and ethical responsibility to engage with you about what your opinion of climate change is, what your thoughts are as to what Council should be. No, Pete, it's not a one-sided discussion. It is simply a discussion where we're talking about Council's response to climate change not a discussion about whether climate change is real. We're also not discussing whether the world is flat, whether vaccines are effective, and whether COVID-19 can be cured by injecting Dettol, for similar reasons. So, a brief introduction to the 10-year plan. Council works in a series of 10-year plans, and our next 10-year plan is between 2021 to 2031. A 10-year plan sets out what Council expects to undertake over the next 10 years and the budget to get it done. 10-year plans are a legal requirement for councils. Part of the process of Council deciding what it wants to achieve in the next 10 years and setting the budget to do so is engaging with our community in terms of what is important and what the community wants to see delivered. And we have to balance this with the stuff we are required to do by law. These are things like core infrastructure, roading, water, wastewater, drinking water, etc., etc. Animal control, building regulations, noise control, liquor licensing. These are all things councils are required to do by law and so are not optional. And then there are some things we do, like community development and economic development, that are extremely important and also priorities for council. So while keeping our legal requirements and budget obligations in mind, we want you to know that your vision is the important thing to guide us for the 10-year future for Manawatu District. The theme for our 10-year plan is Manawatu Meki, using the phrase tu meki, which means too much or awesome, combined with Manawatu. We want to know what makes Manawatu Meki for you. Let us know by commenting, and if you like, use the hashtag Manawatu2Meki. The topics we'll be covering in these Facebook Live sessions, the big 5 issues, are things we want to get your feedback so we can incorporate that into our 10-year plan. We need to get our heads around the problem, and we need to understand what your thinking is around climate change. So we're looking forward to that. And on our webpage, you'll find a webpage dedicated to our 10-year plan, and for each one of these 5 significant topics, there is a separate page where you can post questions or comments, and we even have polls to see what you think about things. So thank you very much.
So climate change, what's the situation? Over the next 20 years, the Manawatu District is likely to experience warmer winters with fewer frosts, like we are at the moment, and hotter summers with increased risk of drought. NIWA has projected that average annual temperatures in our wider region are likely to increase by up to 1.1 degree by 2040 and 3.1 degrees by 2090. NIWA also predicts an increase in the number of flood events per year. We are all familiar with the problems floods and droughts bring, but an increase in temperature can also bring new pests and diseases, or better conditions for existing pests. Species that are already under threat may struggle to survive because of changes to their ecosystem. On the other hand, changes may also present opportunities, for example, better growing conditions for certain crops or farming practices. Challenges to the district and our council. While we have a general understanding of the climate challenges our district faces, there is almost no local scientifically based projections that can help us understand what to expect. The data we do have is at a regional level, a much larger geographical area than just our district. It is also based on averages, for example, average temperature and average rainfall. But when we're planning for climate change, averages aren't very helpful. It is the extremes that we need to be factoring in, because it is the extremes that will affect us the most. The lack of robust local scientific data makes it difficult to plan with any certainty. Not only is there very little data, but the impacts of climate change will be a bit like billiard balls. When one hits another, the knock-on effect of the rest of the balls can take will be difficult to anticipate, and we will likely have unexpected outcomes. And of course, each community is like a different billiard table. Each will have different environmental, social and cultural needs to prepare for, and responses to those needs may have knock-on effects on the environment or other communities that were not anticipated. For example, rising water tables could actually affect low-lying cemeteries and urupā, which could cause issues that we had not planned for, which would raise environmental and cultural concerns amongst the community. Coastal communities will have different concerns than inland hill country communities. Our elderly folks will have different needs from our farmers. Mana whenua will have different concerns from our migrant community. These are the sorts of concerns that Council needs to be engaging with as we think about climate change adaptation. And we have not even mentioned the challenge of planning for adaptable and resilient infrastructure. All of this uncertainty makes adaptation planning a huge challenge for Council. One thing that is certain is that adaptation measures are going to be expensive. Council must invest wisely and carefully in making sure our infrastructure is resilient and fit for the future. We also need to invest in community connectedness and resilience. We have seen how important that is in the last few months, as we have supported our elderly and vulnerable during the current lockdown with essential provisions. While there is some financial assistance from central government in the form of roading subsidies, we are largely on our own when it comes to funding any climate change adaptation measures. This will have an impact on our rates.
So what are Council's legal obligations? Well, the legal purpose of local government is to promote the social, economic, environmental and cultural well-being of communities in the present and for the future. These are known as the four well-beings: social, economic, environmental and cultural. And all of these will potentially be impacted by climate change. So we need to do our best to ensure that these well-beings are protected for the community and enhanced. And that means considering and preparing for climate change's impact on the environment, on the economy, on our social connectiveness, and on our cultural practices, as Alison described. Now, the challenge with that is it's very hard to determine exactly what that will be. We're not sure what the impact on our coastal communities will be of climate change. If there's significant sea level rise, it may have a major impact. On the other hand, we might see something that's called accretion and actually see the coast expand, in which case the impact is much less. What we do know is we're likely to see far more extreme weather events, and these have a major impact on our society in terms of social connectiveness, economic impact and environmental and cultural well-being. So what role does Council need to play in these scenarios? Well, that's the question we're asking you. In terms of legal obligations, and including meeting the four well-beings, we're also required to, in our planning documents, promote the well-beings, and then we have to report on how we are achieving our goals. So we actually have to define measures which allow us to determine how we're going in terms of environmental well-being, social, cultural and economic well-being. We're also required to, under the Zero Carbon Act, to be able to report regarding local governance, risks and planning approaches to feed into the Crown, i.e. central government's own risk assessments and adaptation planning. And this is something that is already happening with the Council, in that we get regular requests from central government to provide us information on what we're doing about climate change. There's not a lot of detail about those reporting requirements, but because Council is a public body, basically central government can ask us to report however they like, and we're required to do so.
So what is Council doing already? There are several things that Council is doing already to assist with our planning for climate change adaptation. MDC is working with Horizons and the other 6 councils in the region to prepare a regional vulnerability assessment. This assessment will identify areas of value and concern within the Manawatu-Whanganui region and help raise awareness of any current or anticipated problems. This will help us work with the community in prioritising our vulnerable locations and vulnerable communities. This assessment is still in the very early stages. Council is also working with Horizons to make sure we have up-to-date flood model maps, which will help identify robust data on the vulnerable areas within our district. Along with this, the planning and design of urban development areas like Precinct 4 in Fielding take into account historical data and future projections on flooding to make sure future residents of the area will be affected as little as possible when floods come. MDC staff have been participating in national workshops led by the Ministry for the Environment to help develop the first national climate change risk assessment. This is due in the next couple of months and will be updated every 6 years. The Council has also been working to understand what a local climate change response could look like for our agricultural community. An agricultural sector workshop was scheduled for March but had to be delayed due to COVID-19 lockdown. We are looking at new dates for this and it is likely to be in late June. Over the last few years, MDC has been very intentional about investing for the future in a resilient water supply for our district. While drought is something we are very familiar with around here, one thing we can be confident about is having enough water for our people and our stock in the future. 5 of MDC's 6 water sources are extracted from underground and are deep enough that they are largely protected from weather extremes. The other scheme, the Stanway Halcombe scheme, is reliant on surface water that comes from the Rangitikei River, but even this year with the long dry was not affected. Council recently set its strategic priorities for 2021 onwards, and these are a place to belong and grow, a future planned together, an environment to be proud of, infrastructure fit for the future, a prosperous, resilient economy, value for money and excellence in local government. Council will be developing an environmental strategy that sets out goals and actions to ensure that we have an environment to be proud of. This strategy will include a range of elements of environmental responsibility, including MDC's approach to climate change mitigation and adaptation. We'll be working alongside our communities to develop this, so be sure to sign up to our mailing list on our climate change page if you want to be part of this.
So now we have the opportunity to answer your questions. As before we noted, we'll do our best to answer the questions now. If there are any we can't answer, we'll go away, get the information and come back. And I'll start with the question Angela has asked, which is asking the question about our water sources. And as Alison just mentioned, 5 of our 6 sources are from underground. Can you please outline the climate change assumptions and also population growth assumptions your technical staff used in the modelling for them to so confidently make this statement? Okay, so the climate change assumptions we use are based on NIWA's climate modelling. NIWA has done a national and regional scale climate change model, so that provides a forecast of basically weather patterns, rainfall and temperature change. And I don't have those individual figures for me, but they're available on the Horizons website if you wish to look those up. And the population numbers are based on Stats New Zealand, and we also get additional input on climate change from specialist economist Infometrics. So our population numbers, Stats has basically a low, medium and high estimate, and we have consistently used the high population growth estimate because we've found that to be more accurate than the median estimate based on basically we're looking back over the last 10 years. And we've currently got Infometrics reviewing their population forecasts in light of what may happen as a result of COVID-19. In terms of the statement, largely protected from extremes in climate. So because the Manawatu is subject to flooding, we have literally stress tested our water systems on more than one occasions. We're very confident in our below ground infrastructure and its ability to withstand flooding and heavy rainfall, and we have, the ability, say, with our wastewater system to withstand significant ingress of stormwater and basically divert that around the plant into our large holding ponds, so it can then be reprocessed later on. So you may get a temporary disruption in the water systems when you get a major flood event, but it won't be long term because of the resilience of our systems.
There's a few other questions here also from Angela, because she was very organised and sent them in for us. What has MDC got in mind in terms of involving Manawatu residents in the development of their environmental strategy? Well, just like for those who were involved last year in our community development strategy, we absolutely intend to involve the community, key stakeholders. We plan to have widespread community workshops and may even consider a community reference group if there are a number of people out there who would like to be involved in that. So we're absolutely inviting your participation. We're at the beginning of the process and we want you to help us formulate our plan. So please register your interest. Another question from Angela was, is MDC willing to take a significant leadership role in terms of lobbying central government to take urgent action on climate change? As Richard and I commented, probably not very necessary with the current government, but however, our council, along with the other 77 councils in New Zealand, belong to Local Government New Zealand, where climate change is one of the flagship projects, and we have a reference group there which is a mixture of governance and managers from across the country, and most of our lobbying to government is happening through that avenue.
Trevor's just posted a question. It's not just about coping with change. What changes are proposed to reverse or reduce the current trajectory? So that's really a discussion around adaptation, which is dealing with the effects of climate change, and mitigation, trying to reverse or reduce the effects of climate change. Councils tend to be focused on adaptation because that's something we have a lot more control over. Ultimately, it's the residents of the district who determine what happens in terms of mitigation, but the council itself is busy working out how it can reduce its energy consumption, how it can reduce its greenhouse gas footprint, what are the steps we can take to try and reduce our own emissions, both at an individual and at a collective level.
I can do one on electric vehicles if you like.
Yep.
We have a question here from Julianne on electric vehicles and charging stations within the Manawatu district, and also whether the MDC vehicle fleet has electric vehicles. It's been quite a hard space to work in. As far as I know, we still only have one public electric vehicle charging station within our district, so range is quite a problem for many in the community, especially in our rural communities. At this point in time, MDC vehicle fleet doesn't have any electric vehicles. Many of our vehicles are specialised utilities with tools and work centres on them, but in the future it's probably something we could look at for perhaps the smaller journeys around the town.
And we do have some hybrid vehicles, so that's a step in the right direction. Yeah, the big issue with our utility vehicles is the availability of, there aren't any suitable electric utility vehicles, and also range. Question submitted by Philip McConkey. Philip sent in 3 questions. Given the apparent importance you give to climate change, why are you not giving it primary priority so that all of Council's policies and actions are measured against their impact on climate change? Without that emphasis, it's too easy for climate change to be made subservient to economic concerns. It's important to note that in the legislation that sets up councils and gives them their purpose, we talk about the 4 well-beings: economic, cultural, social and environmental. And They are four that we have to consider simultaneously. There is no one that has primacy. So we can't put climate change ahead of those other well-beings. Council's got to balance all of them in its decision making. His second question, in my experience, most members of the public, including your ratepayers, either don't appreciate the importance of climate change in their lives and futures, or if they do, they don't know what to do about it. Would you consider it to be your council's role in educating your citizens about climate change and how they can address it? Well, we're certainly keen to have a conversation with the community about climate change, and this is our start to get information out there and discuss it. But we're also very aware as there is a huge amount of information available on climate change, both from government sources, which I would suggest people look at as they're highly reliable, and also from organisations like the International Panel on Climate Change. Again, scientific, so well worth reviewing. So I think if people wish to be educated about climate change, they can be. And then they can determine their own level of concerns. Your report appears to give primacy to adaptation more than mitigation, and that's a question we've already covered off.
There's a question from Tony from Kimbolton. Would council help rural communities to set up electric charging stations? I believe we already have investigated Kimbolton, and I believe it was about $70,000 or $80,000, and at the time it didn't. There wasn't the funding to proceed with it, but I'm sure we will be able to look at these things again as more funding becomes available, hopefully from government sources, because we certainly want to get the range out there for electric vehicles.
Julianne Bolton asks, what support is going to be available to help dairy and beef farmers to transition to something with less impact on climate change? Brooke?